Have you ever noticed how life, in its strange delicacy, never ceases to surprise us? Many imagine that spiritual awakening is like crossing a magical threshold into a realm without pain, where everything becomes soft and without friction. But it isn't so. Awakening does not remove challenges, it intensifies them. Not because the world becomes more cruel, but because your perception becomes clearer. You see too much, feel too much, understand too much, to remain asleep in the old comfort of illusions. And in this seeing, one of the greatest ironies reveals itself. Suddenly, that which once seemed so vital, so overwhelming, so necessary for life, the old ritual of falling in love, begins to lose its power. It is not that love disappears, it is not that the heart becomes cold. On the contrary, love, for the first time, shows its true face. But the games that once were called love, the feverish fire of need and projection, the dramas we called passion, these become far too transparent to seduce any longer. What we call falling in love has always been, in large part, a kind of trance. You meet someone, and almost without realizing it, your mind begins to weave like a diligent spider, spinning threads of memory, desire, fantasy. Soon, you are no longer facing the person themselves, but a colorful tapestry of imagination you have projected upon them. And, intoxicated by your own creation, you declare, "I am in love." But look closely. It is not the person you love, it is the reflection, the mirror adorned with your own longings. And there is an even stranger detail. This love the world so highly exalts often shines brighter in the absence of the other than in their presence. It is when they are not there, when there is uncertainty, when the heart burns in the sweetness of torment, that the fire ignites. Absence becomes fuel. It is a love that feeds on hunger, not on wholeness, a delicate madness, a delirium disguised as beauty. The ego is clever at disguising its loneliness. It calls it passion, dresses it in noble words, trembling glances, eternal promises. But at its root, it is only saying, "I am incomplete, I need you to complete me." That is not love, it is need. And as long as love is confused with need, it will always be unstable, like a flame that remains lit only as long as there is fuel. When insecurity disappears, the flame also dies out. Thus is drawn the great illusion of romance. A silent pact: I will soothe your loneliness if you soothe mine. But when the first ecstasy passes, when the intoxication of novelty fades, many wonder whether they ever truly loved at all, or merely negotiated needs without ever signing the contract. Awakening is simply the moment when the veil slips, and you glimpse the machinery of the whole performance, the self, the ego, desire, and their endless games. You realize that what you once called love was entangled with fear of loneliness, with the longing to be seen, with the projection of fantasies. And once that recognition takes root, it becomes impossible to throw yourself blindly as before. It is not that love is rejected. On the contrary, you love more deeply, more silently, more freely. But the illusion loses its power. The spell breaks. Where once you swore you had found your missing half, now you see only a human being, whole, with their joys and their shadows. And what was once enchantment begins to dissolve. The fire that once seemed to consume now reveals itself to be only smoke. Suddenly, what was once rapture turns into a strange lightness. The desire that once seemed irresistible reveals itself fragile, like little paper boats on an infinite ocean. The suspense, the waiting game, the pain of uncertainty, all of this begins to sound almost comical beside the silence you have discovered within yourself. It is not contempt, it is not cynicism, it is simply the inability to confuse once again need with love, drama with passion, attachment with devotion. The stage that once seemed sacred reveals itself as nothing but theater. And you can still watch, laugh, cry, embrace, but knowing now it is a play, not ultimate truth. And so, life presents you with a strange blessing. Romance, as the world understands it, loses its shine. But in the same movement, an immense space opens, because what once seemed like love was only a game, and you now know something that lies beyond the game. You no longer seek someone to complete you, because you have understood that you are already complete. The emptiness that once fed the flame is gone. What remains is wholeness. And it is this wholeness that transforms love into something radically different. No longer the restless fire of need, but the serene flame of presence. No longer the fever of desire, but the clarity of sharing. And it is precisely for this reason that, paradoxically, it becomes so difficult to fall in love again. Because that which sustained the game, incompleteness, hunger, blindness, no longer exists in you. The old theater dissolves, and with it the old intoxication. And though this may seem like loss, it is in truth the first glimpse of freedom. And when that first veil falls, when you discover that the love you once knew was sustained by absence, by hunger, by fantasy, another lesson arises, harder, more solitary. For suddenly, what once seemed natural, what everyone around you seemed to share so easily, is no longer possible for you in the same way. You can no longer participate in the old dance. You can no longer deceive yourself. And this inability is not a rational choice, but the impossibility of closing your eyes again. You may try. You may throw yourself into romances, into games of seduction, into carefully staged melodramas. You may even feel for an instant an echo of the old rapture. But soon, like an actor who forgets his lines in the middle of the play, consciousness returns, the enchantment dissolves, and the heart remains lucid. What once seemed like ecstasy now sounds like an echo, a shadow, a repetition. This is where many confuse awakening with coldness. He no longer loves, they say. She has become distant, untouchable. But this is a mistake. What disappears is not the capacity to love, but the willingness to confuse love with need. The awakened heart does not accept bargains disguised as promises, does not let itself be seduced by the drama that requires blindness. To love now is something else. It is silence, clarity, generosity, without calculation. But this new love, purer and rarer, brings with it an unexpected consequence. The crowd disperses. Those who once seemed many suddenly become few. For it is rare to meet those who have walked through their own shadows and awakened as well. And this is why love, for the awakened, seems almost impossible. Not because love does not exist, but because illusion can no longer be mistaken for truth. And so a strange solitude settles in, not the small solitude of being without company, but the vast solitude of seeing more than others are prepared to see. It is like standing in a room full of voices, yet realizing that all of them are still repeating the lines of the old script. You, having left the theater, can no longer participate, and the silence you carry inside feels greater than any conversation around you. This solitude may feel like exile, for suddenly you belong and do not belong. You walk among others, but you do not blend in. You smile, you converse, you even participate. But there is always a part of you that observes, that knows, that can no longer pretend. And in that knowing lies a secret pain, the pain of realizing that much of what we once called love was merely a disguise for fear. The fear of being alone, the fear of not being seen, the fear of not being enough. And once you no longer fear so much, once you no longer desperately seek rescue, the old bonds become fragile, like rotten ropes that unravel at the slightest touch. Then, perhaps for the first time, you are faced with the true choice: to continue participating in the play, pretending to believe in the old illusions, or to remain in the silence of lucidity, even if it distances you from the crowd. Most choose the first option, because company is sweet, even when built upon illusions. But the awakened know, returning to sleep is no longer possible. And thus a new form of love is born, a form so subtle it can hardly be named. No longer a love of chains, but of freedom. No longer a love of promises, but of presence. It does not seek to rescue or be rescued. It does not wish to imprison or be imprisoned. It only shares, like two flames burning side by side, without stealing each other's fire. No longer a love of chains, but of freedom. No longer a love of promises, but of presence. It does not seek to rescue or be rescued. It does not wish to imprison or be imprisoned. It only shares, like two flames burning side by side, without stealing each other's fire. This love is rare, and it is rare because it demands wholeness. You cannot arrive at it carrying holes you expect someone else to fill. It only blossoms in hearts that already know themselves as whole. And so many confuse it with an absence of love. But the truth is the opposite. It is love in its fullest, clearest, freest form. And in this paradox lies both the beauty and the pain of awakening. The world offers you countless chances to become intoxicated again, countless invitations to the old game, but you can no longer accept, for you have discovered something more precious than feverish passion. You have discovered peace, and peace, once recognized, is far too valuable to be sacrificed on the altar of illusions. And it is here that many feel fear. The fear that this peace might mean eternal solitude. The fear that they may never find another heart capable of inhabiting the same space. For yes, it is rare for two to awaken together, and until such a meeting happens, there is a path to be walked in silence, in the clarity of one's own presence. But silence is not emptiness. It is fullness. It is like the calm sea after a storm. It may seem monotonous to those who expect the drama of thunder, but to those who have been battered by the waves, that calm is a miracle. So it is with awakened love. It does not shout, it does not beg, it does not burn with jealousy. It simply is. And when at last you meet another being who also walks awakened, the meeting is like the touch of two calm waters. There is no explosion, no vertigo. There is only a natural flow, a harmony so evident it seems to have always been there. And this meeting, precisely because it is so rare, is as precious as a diamond. That is why the awakened heart prefers to wait. It prefers the long journey in silence to the return of old chains. For it knows that any love born of fear will be a prison, and that any prison will be a betrayal of the freedom already gained. Better to walk alone with clarity than accompanied by illusion. And so life becomes a patient waiting, not an anxious waiting, but a quiet waiting, like the soil that trusts in the coming of rain, even without knowing when it will fall. For those who have awakened no longer seek love as escape, but as celebration, and this celebration can only happen when two meet as whole beings. And in this state of serene waiting, the awakened heart learns to rest within itself. No longer is there the restlessness of the hunter prowling the forest in search of prey. No longer is there the anxiety of the poet writing fevered verses to fill the emptiness of absence. There is only a mature silence, watching life unfold through its cycles of light and shadow, without demanding that it bend to one's own needs. And yet, this silence is not apathy. On the contrary, it is a fertile space, where every encounter becomes sharper, more alive, more true. When there is no longer a rush to capture or possess, every glance gains intensity, every gesture carries the weight of the universe. It is as if life, in its simplicity, reveals a depth that was once hidden beneath the noise of need. You realize that to love is not to lose yourself in another, but to find yourself more fully in the reflection the other returns to you. The other is no longer the savior, the complement, the missing half. They are simply a traveler, crossing your path for a moment. And if there is affinity, if there is resonance, the meeting blooms naturally, without being forced, without needing to be adorned with illusions. And in this blooming, awakened love demands no guarantees. It does not ask for promises of eternity. It does not anchor itself in papers. It does not feed on vows that time will inevitably consume. It lives in the now, because it recognizes that only the now is real. Thus it can be intense without being possessive, deep without being needy, free without being cold. But this freedom is not easily understood. The world fears what it cannot bind. The world distrusts what does not bow to the invisible contract of need. Many will look at this silent love and say it is too detached, that it is a lack of surrender, that it is fear disguised. But the awakened heart smiles at such accusations, for it knows that the true fear is precisely what sustains the old ways of loving. And here another paradox reveals itself. When there is no longer the urgency to be loved, the capacity to love expands. When there is no longer the obsession to be recognized, every gesture of presence becomes a pure gift. It is in this letting go that love finds its most authentic form, not as a contract of needs, but as a dance of freedoms. Of course, living this way is not easy. Clarity requires courage, for the temptation to return to the theater, to once again accept the roles and lines, is great. There is comfort in following the familiar script. There is warmth in sharing the illusion, even while knowing it is illusion. But for the awakened, such a return would cost too much. It would cost the loss of peace itself, and whoever has tasted peace no longer trades it for fever. And so love becomes something almost unspeakable. It ceases to be the fire that consumes and becomes the ember that never stops warming. It ceases to be a storm to become a river. It ceases to be a cry to become silence. And precisely because of this, it is stronger, more enduring, more real. And you begin to see that life itself is, in a way, one great rehearsal about love. From the first steps of childhood, when we seek our mother's gaze as confirmation of our existence, to the passions of youth, to the bonds we build in maturity, all of it is a dance around this desire to be recognized, to be seen, to be loved. But awakening reveals that what we sought outside was always the reflection of what we lacked within. That the love we begged from others was, in truth, the love we had not yet learned to give ourselves. And when this love finally blooms inside, the external world ceases to be a prison. You no longer need to beg for attention, no longer need to lose yourself in games of seduction, no longer need to prove anything to anyone. You are already whole. And it is precisely this wholeness that makes space for a new kind of meeting. But take note, this does not mean that life becomes easy. Clarity does not protect you from pain. You may still lose, you may still suffer, you may still watch bonds dissolve. But the difference is that now you no longer confuse pain with lack, nor loss with failure. You know that everything flows, everything changes, everything passes. And in this knowing there is a serenity that makes even solitude bearable. From the outside, this serenity may look like resignation, but those who experience it know it is freedom. Because when you no longer desperately need another to be whole, you can finally love them as they are, without shaping them, without imprisoning them, without turning them into a mirror of your own needs. This is how awakened love manifests itself, as acceptance. Not passive acceptance, but the deep acceptance that each being is complete in themselves, and that true meeting can only happen between whole beings. And then love becomes rarer, but infinitely more precious. It is not found on every corner. It is not born from every glance. It is not manufactured by effort. It is the fruit of maturity, of silence, of depth, and when it comes, it needs no adornment. Presence is enough. That is why the awakened heart is patient. It does not rush. It does not drown in need. It knows how to wait, not as one who clings to a promise, but as one who rests in trust. For it knows that true love is not built, not invented, not fabricated. It happens when two rivers, each whole in themselves, choose to run together for a stretch of eternity. And when you arrive at this point, when you no longer seek to be saved, when you no longer chase the illusion of being completed, something profoundly simple is revealed. Love is no longer a goal, nor an achievement, nor a prize for well-executed efforts. It is simply the natural breath of being, flowing when there are no barriers, when there is no fear. You discover that true love does not need to be sought, because it has never been absent. It has always been there, in the way the wind touches the trees, in the way the sun rests upon the skin, in the way life itself insists on renewing at every instant. Love is not an object you find, it is the very quality of the awakened gaze. And so, the paradox fulfills itself. The one who no longer needs to be loved is the one who can love most fully. Because there are no longer hidden contracts, no longer games of power, no longer illusions to sustain. Love becomes pure presence, and its expression is freedom. Yes, perhaps you will walk long stretches alone. Perhaps you will meet only rare companions capable of looking with the same depth. Perhaps your road will be quieter than that of many. But silence is no longer absence, it is fullness. It is in this space that you rest, and it is from this space that any true meeting can be born. And if one day such a meeting comes, it will be like the flight of two birds side by side, without binding each other, like two flames that illuminate without consuming, like two rivers that touch without ceasing to be themselves. This love does not promise eternity, does not beg for permanence, does not fear change. It simply lives, and by living, it is eternal in every instant. And so, at the end of it all, you understand. It is not that the awakened no longer know how to love. It is that they no longer fall into the trance of illusory love. They do not fall in love, they rise in it. And this rising is silent, clear, vast as the night sky. For when the eyes finally open, there is no longer hurry, no longer fear, no longer need. What remains is only life in its wholeness, shining in every moment like a miracle. And in this miracle, love is not prison, not lack, not contract. It is freedom, it is presence, it is the very breath of the universe. And then you smile, not because you have found all the answers, but because you no longer need them.